Hello, and thank you for joining me. Today, we're returning to Fallout 76, where we're going to spend another 1,000 script with the Purveyor on 3-star ranged legendary weapons, and as always, I'll take a moment to talk about each one, about what makes it good, bad, or indifferent. So let's go on ahead and get started and see what we get today. So for our first roll, we got an Instigating Short Hunting Rifle with bashing damage increased by 50% and +1 perception. So the Instigating effect, it got nerfed right around the same time of the legendary effect rebalancing several patches back at this point, and it is not really telling the truth. It's not double the damage that you see on your weapon card, assuming that you have equipped any perks to increase that damage or using any chems or anything like that. It's only double the base damage of the weapon. So that's important to keep in mind, and that makes it, quite frankly, much worse as a first star, although it can still be useful on slower, harder hitting weapons, because, you know, that double base damage when the weapon already hits pretty hard can be pretty significant. So the hunting rifle is one of the types of weapons that it can still be good on, because you really want to be getting those one-shot kills with the hunting rifle, so getting double your base damage on the weapon is going to help with that. So that's I wouldn't say it's a great first star, but it's definitely a solid first star for this weapon. The second star, however, is very disappointing. Bashing damage increased by 50%. That's really only good on the minigun, and only then, really, if you're going to be putting the Shredder mod on it and using it as a melee weapon. In that case, it's very strong. On pretty much any other weapon in any other situation, it is pretty much worthless, because the bashing damage in this game is just very, very low, so adding 50% of a very small number is adding an even smaller number to that number, and not really significant. So +1 perception is not terrible. I don't think anyone's going to complain about getting an extra point on their specials, but the primary benefit of perception is that it's going to be increasing your VATS accuracy, which this is definitely the kind of weapon that you could use in VATS almost exclusively, but the benefit for a single point of perception is pretty low, so it's doing something. It's just not going to be doing a whole lot for you. It's definitely not going to be a night and day difference or anything like that, so I would definitely prefer to see a better third star as well. Overall, this one is pretty mediocre. It's not absolutely terrible. I could see, you know, some players having use for it until they got their hands on something better, but it's definitely not super exciting. So let's see what else we get. And here we've got a Hunter's Gauss Pistol with 25% faster fire rate and hits having a chance to generate a stealth field. So the Hunter's effect is one of the less useful of the Slayer's effects, just because there's not a lot of times when most players are going to be going around hunting animals. It does work on the Scorch Beast, so there is some benefit for that, a use case for that, but in general, you're not going to be going out and hunting Deathclaws or Yaoguais or things like that, unless maybe there's a challenge to go kill 3 Deathclaws or something for the scoreboard or something that day. But even then, I think most players are not going to be wanting to keep a specific weapon around for that. They'll just use whatever weapon they happen to have on them, and that makes sense to me. That's the way I handle it. So the first star is kind of disappointing. The second star is actually one of the best second stars in the game for many different weapons, but this is not one of them, simply because the Gauss Pistol, if you do not charge it up, it will fire as quickly as you can pull the trigger. You're going to get a lot less damage that way, but you can fire it as quickly as you can pull the trigger, so increasing that by 25%, unlike some weapons like the Alien, the Alien Disintegrator, we found that the 25% faster fire rate on the semi-automatic version really did increase its fire rate. On this weapon, it will not, and it also will not increase the speed at which the weapon charges up, so it's really doing nothing on this weapon. The hits having a chance to generate a stealth field, that's not a bad thing. It could definitely help you stay in stealth if you're having trouble staying in stealth, and I've had one of my viewers tell me that they were able to stay in stealth using a flamer, which is a heavy gun, and I don't believe it is considered to be suppressed, so if that's the case, then that's actually a pretty solid effect. The flamer does have a decent fire rate, so that could have something to do with it, but overall, it's an interesting effect. one that I don't find a lot of use for because I spec around being stealth even without that effect. But, you know, if you're not really stealth spec and just wanting to mess around with stealth a little bit, then that could be useful. Or if you are stealth spec and having trouble actually staying in stealth, then you may find some use for that. But overall, I don't think this is the weapon that you're going to want it on. So this one is pretty much a dud. Let's see what else we can get. Alright, well, we got another Gauss Pistol. This one is a bit better. We've got an anti-armor Gauss Pistol with replenishing action points with each kill and faster movement speed while aiming. So anti-armor is one of the better effects in the game, at least in my opinion. It's hard to exactly quantify how much damage it does, like the Aristocrats effect, for example, does plus 50% damage if you have your caps at 32,000, for example, but it's really very powerful against enemies with strong armor. You know, it's pretty useless against squishy enemies, but I don't consider that to be a huge drawback simply because squishy enemies are, well, squishy. So you probably don't need much in the way of a legendary effect to put down a squishy enemy. So you really are typically wanting your best effects on weapons, or on enemies that are tough and can take a beating. So anti-armor is good for that, in my opinion. And it's not as good as it could be because the 50% armor penetration does not stack exactly, 50% with your perks that you may have equipped for giving you armor penetrations, such as the... I forget the name of the perk for... Let's take a look. It is Tank Killer. Gives you 36% armor penetration on pistols and rifles. So when you're talking about that 50% there and adding the 36% from Tank Killer, you're not going to get 86% armor penetration. You're going to get, for example, if you had the 36% armor penetration, you would have 64% left, and then you would penetrate 50% of that, so 32% or whatever. So it's still powerful, it's still worthwhile, just worth keeping that in mind. And if you're a melee character, anti-armor might be a lot less useful for you than for other characters because of, I believe it's Incisor that gives just a ridiculous amount of armor penetration, something like 90%. So if you're using melee, you probably don't need anti-armor, but for everyone else, it's a very good effect. The replenishing action points with each kill is very strong because it basically lets you keep using VATS to get your extra damage from your critical hits as well as targeting the weak points, and this is definitely the kind of weapon that you could use almost exclusively in VATS, so that's the way I would typically use it, and so that's a great thing. The third star, faster movement speed while aiming, is not particularly exciting. If you've got the speed demon mutation, it's doing effectively nothing for you. If you don't have the speed demon mutation, then it is doing what it says on the box, just I don't know that there's a lot of difference in speed that you're moving while you're aiming between it and without it, but even so, I don't think a lot of players are running around the battlefield aiming their weapon all the time while they are moving. So, kind of a lost effect there, but the first and second stars are pretty good on this one. Too bad it's not tradable, so I don't really have need of it, so it will probably end up being traded back in for Scrip. So, let's see what else we can get here. And here we've got a Troubleshooters Gatling Plasma with plus 50% VATS hit chance and plus 1 agility. So the Troubleshooters effect is one of the better Slayer's effects in my opinion, just because there are a lot of times that you're going to be actively choosing to fight robots, such as when you are going through the nuke silo or the encrypted event or daily ops, things like that. So you're definitely going to be seeing plenty of robots for most players through their typical gameplay, and robots are not typically the squishiest of enemies, so getting some extra damage specifically against them is a good thing, and I could see some players wanting to keep around a weapon specifically for that purpose. This might not be the ideal weapon for it just because of how heavy it is, but it's still a solid weapon. The plus 50% VATS hit chance, I'm a little torn on this. I have a friend who uses VATS with his Gatling plasmas fairly extensively, and he has good luck with it and really enjoys it, so it can definitely be done. he definitely does not have the AP pool to use this weapon almost exclusively in VATS, but his AP regen is very high, and he is able to basically, lock onto targets, put them down, and then by the time he finds another target, he often has more action points available to do it again. So that's a good thing, and this was exactly the kind of effect, second star, that he would really love on a weapon like this, but I think most players would not really care for that weapon. Even myself, I'm a VATS junkie, and still when I'm playing my heavy gunners, I generally aim down the sights or sometimes hit fire, but mostly aim down the sights. That's just the way I like to do it. But so it could be useful for the right player, but I think for most players it's probably a bad second star on this weapon. And then +1 agility is kind of like the +1 perception, except it's probably a little bit more overall useful because it can give you a little bit more action points as well as a little bit more stealth. So even if you're not a stealth build, the extra action points can let you sprint a little bit further, and everybody likes to sprint forever, so that's a good thing. But again, just like the perception, the +1 point of agility is not doing a whole lot on that, so not terribly exciting. This is a solid, I'd say, mid-range weapon or niche weapon, but it's definitely not a great weapon, not a great roll. So let's see what else we can get. Okay, and here we've got a Troubleshooters black powder rifle with bashing damage increased by 50% and faster movement speed while aiming. So this one is basically junk. The Troubleshooters effect we talked about before, and in theory is still good because you're going to be seeing a lot of robots and they're not the squishiest, so getting some extra damage on them, especially with the black powder rifle where it's even more imperative for you to get those one-shot kills than it is with, say, the hunting rifle, for example, then it's a good thing. But at the same time, I don't think a black powder rifle is really what you're going to want to take into a nuke silo or a daily op or encrypted or, things like that. So, and that's really the best star on this weapon. We've got more bashing damage increased by 50%. We talked about that earlier. This is not a minigun with the shredder mod, so it's not really doing a whole lot here. And then the faster movement speed while aiming, we also talked about that earlier, and it's not really doing a whole lot. So this one's pretty much a dud. Let's go on ahead and try again. Yay, more black powder weapons. So this one is the Hunter's, which we talked about before. The Hunter's black powder pistol with 25% damage while aiming and +1 perception. So again, I don't really think most players are going to find it worthwhile to keep a weapon around specifically to go after animals, and even if they are, it's probably not going to be a black powder pistol. It certainly wouldn't be for me. And so this thing is definitely not good. The +25% damage while aiming is probably the best effect on this weapon, because if you are the type of player who's not super into using VATS and would prefer to aim this thing down the sights or hip fire it, then, but primarily aim it down the sights, then you can get +25% damage. It's base damage of the weapon, but this weapon has very high base damage, so that's a significant amount. So that's not a bad thing. And that'll definitely help you get more of those one-shot kills, which, again, are very imperative for the black powder weapons just because of how quickly how slowly they reload. So that's probably the best star on this weapon. The +1 perception is not bad. If you're the type of player who prefers to use VATS, then you're going to get some benefit out of that. Otherwise, it's not really doing a whole lot for you here, and it does not synergize particularly well with the second star. So, once again, this one's pretty much junk. Let's see what else we can get. Okay, we are definitely on a junk roll here. We've got a Stalker's Gatling laser with +50% VATS hit chance and +1 perception. So not only is this thing a Stalker's, it is also just a Gatling laser and not an ultrasight Gatling laser, which the ultrasight Gatling laser is much better, well, I don't know about much better, but definitely better than the Gatling laser. So even if it had amazing effects on it, it would be rather disappointing because it wasn't on the better version of the weapon. But the Stalker's effect is, in my opinion anyway, the worst of the first stars for ranged legendary weapons in this game at this time, because it really doesn't seem to do much of anything. If you're not in combat, you do have, it's kind of like having the +50% VATS hit chance on the first star when you're not in combat, but it goes away when you're actively in combat. And it still misses sometimes, so that's not plus 100, plus 100% like it says there. And then the increase of the AP cost, that does happen. So overall, not a fan. The plus 50% VATS hit chance, unlike the Gatling Plasma, I think that the Gatling Laser and the Ultrasight Gatling Laser both just fire way too quickly for anyone, even like my friend, to be able to make effective use of the weapon in VATS, just because you're going to be chewing through your AP bar so quickly that you just are not going to have time to use it in VATS before you're going to have to aim it down the sights or hit fire it. So the second star is kind of lost on this weapon, as is the third star, because the primary benefit of perception is that it gives you more VATS accuracy. So overall, this one is basically a big pile. So let's go on ahead and try it again. Wow, Murmur, what did I do to you? Well, here we've got an Exterminator's Gatling Laser, once again a Gatling Laser, not an Ultrasight Gatling Laser, with bashing damage increased by 50% and 90% reduced weight. So the first star, the Exterminator's effect, it's probably the worst of the first stars in my opinion, just because I don't think that many players are spending a lot of time hunting down Mirelurks or bugs. Yeah, if you're still grinding out rep for Crater, then you may be trying to take some Mirelurk meat over to Ohio River Adventures once a day, but even then, I don't think it's really worth keeping a weapon around specifically for that purpose. Although I guess if you were going to do that, this weapon would be a potentially decent choice just because of the 90% reduced weight third star, so it's not going to take up a ton of weight in your inventory. But in general, I think you're just better off using whatever weapon you normally use for that. And then the bashing damage increased by 50%. Well, again, this is not a minigun. It does not have a shredder mod, so enough said there. The 90% reduced weight is most definitely the best star on this weapon, just because it makes it weigh a whole heck of a lot less, and that means that I can let it sit in my inventory and get rid of heavier weapons before it, because it won't be taking up so much weight. So yeah, we've got a couple more rolls here. Let's see if we can maybe get something half decent here. Please, Murmur. Okay, well this one's at least interesting. We've got a junky single action revolver with plus 50% VATS hit chance and plus 1 perception. So the junkie's effect is, it used to be kind of king of the hill as far as full health builds with damage bonuses. The anti-armor doesn't actually add any damage, it just lets the damage that you're doing get through more easily. Junkies actually adds extra damage, and you know, there's some situations one's better, some situations the other's better. I'm not going to go into detail on that. I'm certainly not the biggest expert on that either, but overall it used to be considered at least one of the kings of full health build legendary first stars for weapons. And it's still not bad because you can get plus 50% damage bonus from it by having 5 addictions. But with the Aristocrats effect being added, a lot of players I think are preferring the Aristocrats effect because it doesn't require any debuffs like the chemical or the addictions do. So it really depends on playstyle, I think. If you're the type of player who frequently uses chems as buffs for your character, then junkies might be a little bit more useful for you than for some players. But if you are the type of player, kind of like myself, who doesn't really use chems a whole lot for your character to buff them, then you're probably better off with the Aristocrats, although my characters have trouble keeping a hold of 32,000 caps, so that's because I spend them all the time, and I don't have a problem with that. But you know, if you're like that, then you might find the Junkie's effect more useful as well. The plus 50% VATS hit chance is actually going to be very good on this weapon. This is definitely the kind of weapon that you could use almost exclusively in VATS, and doing so would make a lot of sense because the pistols in this game are a bit underpowered compared to most other weapons, and so you're probably going to be wanting to get some extra damage from targeting the weak points as well as those VATS critical hits. So getting some extra VATS accuracy to make sure that you're not missing those hits and being able to hit those weak points reliably is definitely a good thing. And it's also worth noting that it does add to the effective range of the weapon just because it offsets the accuracy penalty drop off after the range on the weapon card. You will still see the damage drop off beyond the range on the weapon card, but at least you can potentially be getting some damage in if it's useful in that situation. And then the +1 perception, again, not super exciting, but at least it synergizes very well with the second star. So overall, this one is not super exciting, but it's at least on the solid side of mediocre, if nothing else. Excuse me. And unfortunately, the single action revolver is definitely not a highly desired weapon, so that kind of holds it back a little bit here. But let's see what else we can get. And here we've got a Zealots short laser pistol with 25% damage while aiming and 90% reduced weight. So the Zealots effect is, I don't know, I'd call it pretty mediocre as far as the Slayer's effects go, because you don't really need any extra damage to deal with the Scorched. I mean, extra damage never hurts, but they're like the human characters or enemies in this game, and they're pretty squishy to begin with. But it does work on the Scorch Beasts as well as the Scorch Beast Queens, so it does have a use case there. The plus 25% damage while aiming, if you're the type of player who prefers to aim a weapon like this down the sights instead of using VATS like I typically would, then that's great because it's just going to be 25% extra free damage for you. So that's definitely nothing to complain about. And then 90% reduced weight is probably not the best effect for a weapon like this because it's already pretty lightweight to begin with. And also, by the time you add on all of your mods, then it's going to increase the weight significantly because the mods that you add to the weapon do not benefit from the 90% reduced weight legendary effect, which I think is kind of wrong, but, you know, teach their own. And I guess it was Bethesda's decision to do that. But overall, this one is kind of pretty mediocre, but I think that was 10, but I'm not certain. So let's do one more just to make certain of it. And here we've got a Troubleshooters minigun with replenishing action points with each kill and 15% faster reload. So we talked about the Troubleshooters effect a little bit earlier, and this weapon is pretty heavy to keep around just for dealing with robots, but if you are a heavy gunner build and you're using the bare arms perk, then that wouldn't be a problem for you. And also, you know, if you're a mid-level player and this is the best, for example, the best kind of minigun that you've gotten a hold of, then I could definitely see you running around with this for a while, because the second star, replenishing action points with each kill, well, that's mostly going to be useful just for keeping you sprinting a lot, because like the Ultrasight and regular Gatling lasers, this weapon has a very high fire rate and is just going to chew through your AP very, very quickly. So even with that second star, I don't think you're going to be able to use this weapon primarily in VATS. But the 15% faster reload, if you don't have the Speed Demon mutation, then it's going to be very, very good. If you do have the Speed Demon mutation, then it's not going to do nothing, but it's not doing a ton for you either. So it's unfortunate because that should be one of the best third stars in the game, but if you've got the Speed Demon mutation, then it's not especially, and I would definitely prefer to see 90% reduced weight on this one, which would actually make this one pretty good, because then you could keep it in your inventory pretty easily for dealing with robots. But yeah, overall, it's not super exciting, not terrible, but not a god roll by any means. So we didn't really get anything super amazing here. We actually got quite a few duds, but we did get a couple of somewhat interesting things. But that's the way it goes with the Purveyor. So anyway, please remember, if you enjoyed my content, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and it doesn't cost any money. And until next time, thank you for watching.